Viante New Mexico podcast. Viante New Mexico is a nonpartisan organization that aims to provide transparency around our elected officials to ensure that they're working together to fix our most pressing issues in education, crime, and quality of life. A natural offshoot of this is to engage New Mexicans, to talk to their elected officials, and to actually vote, which brings us to our podcast today with Aviva Rosman out of Chicago. Hi, Aviva.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So Aviva and I are going to talk today about the importance of voting and how simple it is and how people need to do their research before they get into the voting booth. But before we dive into our questions, I want to give a brief bio about how impressive Aviva is and how grateful I am to have her as an advisor with Viante's work, as I think I would call you now. Aviva is the COO and co-founder of BallotReady, an award-winning voter guide to every race and referendum on the ballot. Started in 2015 with support from the National Science Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, BallotReady makes it easy for voters to vote informed on their entire ballot. Aviva grew up working on campaigns at all levels, including her own successful run for local office. She began her career teaching high school math and leading the special education department as the core member of Teach for America, and has a background in policy, government, and management consulting. Aviva has been named one of Chicago Crane's 20 in their 20s, Specific Standards 30 Thinkers Under 30, WeWork's Young Innovators, and was honored with the 2017 Midwest Women in Tech Award for Social Impact. She serves as a mentor at 1871 and lectures on entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago's Harris School. Aviva has her BA and master's from the University of Chicago, both in public policy. Thank you for joining us, and how impressive. You're so young and you've done so much.
You know, you can tell I have a one-track mind, though, because it's all really around the same stuff.
That just shows commitment to the cause, which is fantastic. So along that same vein, tell us a little bit more about BallotReady and why you decided to start it.
Yeah, so it actually goes back to something you mentioned, which is when I ran for a very, very local office here in Chicago. So Chicago is unique in that each school has its own elected body that can hire and fire the principal, approve the school budget, and make general recommendations. So I decided to run for the school in my community because I'd been a teacher for 4 years. I was leaving the classroom to go back to grad school, and I knew I was really passionate about education and wanted to stay involved. As you do when you're running for office, I made a list of every single person I knew and asked them to come vote for me. And one of the people I asked was my friend from college, Alex, who lived in the neighborhood. And she said, you know, I didn't even know that this election was taking place. And I ended up winning with 96 total votes. Yeah, thank you. That gives you a sense of how local it was. I won by 16 votes. And also, Alex didn't actually show up to vote for me. So it's very good I still won because I forgave her and we started just talking about this problem, which is broader than just these local elections, which I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of 2019 are a big issue. But more generally, both of us had this experience of walking into a voting booth, feeling prepared to vote for governor or president or senator, and just getting there, realizing there are many more names on the ballot and feeling really guilty because we either guessed or we skipped some, or, you know, in a local election we didn't show up. So that was the origin of BallotReady, just trying to solve that problem for ourselves.
Wow, incredible. And you bring up a really interesting point that I don't think many know about. Like, when we talk about 2019 elections as opposed to 2020, tell us what the differences are there.
Yeah, so 2020 obviously is a huge election year. We'll have the presidential races, but we'll also have many other races down the ballot, Congress, state legislature in New Mexico. And probably people know more about the 2020 elections than 2019 elections because there's so much in the news about the presidential candidates. I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like the 2020 election's already been going on for many months.
Yeah.
But in 2019, I'm looking up, we've gathered about 900 candidates already who are running for offices in New Mexico. So already, that's a huge amount that people might not know about for about 500 different positions. But the reason people don't know is these are positions like municipal court judge, village council, soil and water conservation district. These are very local positions, but they're so important. People are running for the University of New Mexico board, for example. If you think about that, that has huge implications for day-to-day life, but it's not covered in the media the same way because it's not the presidential candidates, it's not the horse race. And so a lot of times local elections like the ones in 2019 are decided by very few votes because no one knows about them.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think most people choose not to vote?
That's a great question. We've talked to a lot of voters, and I'll say it breaks down to a couple things. One is really the lack of information, just knowing, number one, that the election is taking place. People might not know that. And then people find out that it's taking place, but they say, okay, Soil and Water Conservation District, I don't know who that is. I don't know what they do. And it could be they don't realize why it's important, or it could be they say, you know what, I'm not informed enough. I don't think it would be responsible for me to go vote without having information, which is part of the problem that we're trying to solve. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is at the local level, we're so used to, in the media, things breaking down to left and right. You know, Republicans, Democrats. How do you feel about global warming? How do you feel about abortion? These hot button topics. When you get down to the local level, the positions aren't so cut and dried, so it's harder for people to make sense of them. It could come down to what should we do about stormwater? What should we do about our roads? And again, these are essential issues for our communities, but it's things people don't have as much of a background around or aren't as trained when they think about politics as these are the issues that I'm going to be voting on. And then the last reason we found is just logistical. When to vote, how to actually vote. New Mexico's lucky in that there's early voting, but what I found is people might not know when the date is, they might not know the locations. If they want to vote absentee, for example, we were talking to someone on our staff who's in their 20s, and we're saying, well, the ballot has to be postmarked by this day, and he said, I don't want to ask a dumb question, but what does postmark mean?
Oh, no.
So I think these are all barriers, right, to making sure that people actually understand how to turn out to vote.
Yeah.
And that's again what we're trying to solve.
You know, I've had some conversations over the past couple of years of doing this work with Viante that I never understood were an issue for people. One question I got last year was, well, I don't want to vote because I don't want my vote to be public. And I had to tell her it's not going to be public. It's only if you voted, that could be drawn upon with just Inspection of Public Records Act. Or another one I got was, well, you know, if I show up to vote, it was this voter's first time, what do I wear? Do I have to dress like I'm going to an office, or can I just show up? I'm like, come as you are. There's no barriers here. You need to exercise your right.
Yeah. Wow. I've never heard any of this before.
Yeah, and it made me feel so foolish to what I guess I oversimplified this issue or this stigma that voting may have in some people's minds, that it's an unapproachable process that they're not informed or educated enough to participate in. And I think as a country, we have to do better at all levels. I mean, you with BallotReady, me with Viante, just letting people know that this is yours. No one else's but you. And you have all the power in the world to exercise that.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think, part of it is it only happens a couple times a year. It's on a Tuesday a lot of the time. It's out of the routine. And so one of the things we're thinking about, and I think this connects to your work too, is how do we make civic engagement more habitual so that it's not just something that happens every 4 years, but it's something that you're engaging with every single day. And it doesn't seem out of the blue then when you're trying to make these decisions about who represents you.
Yeah, as common as getting an oil change if you have a vehicle.
Right.
You should
right,
do it.
Exactly. Yeah, completely.
I'm also wondering, like, how do you guys see that you overcome making participation or civic engagement important to someone? Or, a lot of more things that are more sensational, like I'm thinking of the Women's March or different, like, Black Lives Matter marches or something. People feel compelled because that message resonates with them so much. But how do we get them to get just as excited about voting?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and partially something we're still trying to answer. One thing that's interesting to me is the census did a study of non-voters in 2016, and one of the top reasons people gave is they said, well, I didn't like any of the candidates, which from some extent makes sense because, we had two candidates that were historically unpopular. But from my point of view, it makes no sense because I'm like, there were actually thousands of people who ran for office. Even if you didn't like two of the presidential candidates, there's so many other people on the ballot that you need to turn out and vote. So I think part of it is connecting to local issues and making it clear this is how you can make a difference with your vote, and this is how these people's jobs and your decisions will affect your lives day to day. And one quick example of that is back when I ran for this very local office, part of the reason Alex wanted to vote for me was there was a Trader Joe's that was going to be coming in right across from the school, and the school didn't want it to come there because they said, we have kids here and it's going to create all this traffic. And so it was a big fight in the community, and they said, we're going to defer to this elected body, local school council, to decide whether to zone for the Trader Joe's. And obviously that's a very small issue, but that directly affects people's lives either way, whether they're parents and dropping off and dealing with the traffic or the people in the community who maybe need a grocery store. And so part of what I think the key is elevating those issues of this is our daily lives and this is how elected officials are making decisions.
That's so important. Yeah, and understanding that your vote today can have impacts on your lives months in advance or months later, because you may not know the power they yield, but I think nearly every elected official has a great deal of influence over your life, and the connecting the dots there is a challenge.
Right, exactly, especially if you don't have any information about even who these people are or what they do.
Totally. Well, and you brought up a point about, I didn't like either of the presidential candidates. And you said, but there's thousands of other things and people you can vote on. And it made me think how in those instances where there's congressmen or senators that need voting on too, they are just as important because they're the checks and balances. They're the ones that if you didn't like the person who ultimately gets in office, what are your measures to still see the change that you want in your local officials?
Right. And then if you think even more local, right now, if people are unhappy with the current administration, so many cities and states are taking action. And the same thing happened the opposite way under Obama in terms of, attorneys general suing the government or state legislatures saying, if they're not acting on climate change, I'm going to do this. So yeah, completely. It goes all the way down. All the policies you care about at the presidential level are true at the local level too.
Gosh, that is so, so true. So knowing all of these things and how interconnected they are, let's say somebody does want to get out and vote, what is the best way for them to become an educated voter?
Well, I'll start with a plug for us. So we will have a voter guide live for New Mexico next week. If you go to BallotReady.org, you can type in your address, you can see your ballot, and you can see the research that we've done on local candidates. But beyond that, I'll say a couple things. One is it's good to just know when elections are coming up and be able, if like BallotReady is not live, to be able to look for resources like your local newspaper or League of Women Voters or just the Secretary of State's office to know who's on the ballot. then if you're trying to decide who to vote for, a lot of times I find that if there's a group that you trust, like an endorsing organization that you're a member of, whether it's the NRA or the Sierra Club, finding out who they've endorsed is usually a good proxy. Even if you don't understand the office or know who the elected officials are, they've done some research to figure out who they should endorse that aligns with their values. And then the last thing is either you might be this person or you need to find someone who's just very knowledgeable. And I found that this is true in every community. There's someone who's really involved locally, who goes to school board meetings or to city council meetings. And a lot of times that's who people actually turn to, because a lot of these local candidates don't have websites. They don't necessarily even have Facebook pages, we found. But people in the community know them and know that the work that they're doing, whether they've been responsive about potholes or they haven't, or, they've treated them well in school board meetings. And so that's sort of how democracy works, is just talking to fellow citizens and saying, hey, I'm trying to figure out who to vote for. Do you have an opinion on this race?
That makes me think of a quote, and I'm going to totally botch it, but it's something like, when you don't know what to do, look to those who are involved or who are doing something. And I think we all have those folks in our lives where you may not know the answers, but they may not have all of them, but they can point you in the right direction. That's wonderful.
Yeah, totally. I'll put you on the spot. What do you do? Especially for these local races.
What we're learning right now, we're in the thick of our early election voting season, as you had mentioned. And I'm starting at this base level of understanding of what's on the ballot, perhaps not even who. So we have bonds and we have taxes and we have a proposition. And what I've come to learn is that some folks don't even know what those things are and if they even have an impact on their life. So we're doing presentations throughout the state, and primarily we even have one this evening where I'll talk to a group of young professionals and show them how to download their ballot and walk through, this is a city council position. What does that mean? Well, you don't see a D or an R by their name because at our city council level, it's nonpartisan and it's more about the issues. And then all the way to soil and conservation and those bonds I had mentioned. And so starting from that foundation that so many people are lacking, so that way they know what they want to see out of that elected group. And then just continued awareness that there is an election, that things in New Mexico have changed too, because we had the passage of the Local Election Act, which consolidated all of our elections into November. And so before, folks would see school board candidates on an obscure ballot in March or April. And so voter turnout was very low. Now they're seeing it in November. And for many, it will be the first time that they ever vote on a school board candidate. So telling them the roles and responsibilities that this person would have and who they are. For the first time, Deontay has created a school board candidate questionnaire to give voters just another avenue of figuring out, is this person in line with what they want to see for our schools or not, and find someone else. So for me, I'm just listening and learning and responding as quickly as possible.
That's great, and that's so exciting. And I feel like Deontay is such a good organization too, that the ones I was mentioning, for people to trust and be a resource as they're navigating all this tricky stuff that they might never have even heard of before.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's fun work, as I'm sure you could agree to, because this is something that touches every one of our lives. And there's oftentimes I talk to non-voters, if that's even a thing, but they just choose not to vote. And I almost find it a personal mission to tell them, you can vote, get them to vote, and make them excited that they had that opportunity.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I love voting, so obviously I'm an outlier. But I think it can be fun. I mean, when else do you get to hold the people and make all these decisions accountable? I think it's pretty cool.
Well, I want to end on a question about hopefulness, because we talked about how, voter turnout is low, but what gives you hope that increasing voter turnout is possible and getting people educated is possible.
Well, I think the work you're doing, and in general, what you just mentioned about bringing local elections to the same days, there's a lot of innovation going on right now when it comes to voting to make it easier and more accessible and clear. And I think technology is actually playing a big part in that in terms of sometimes we still call boards of election and they want to fax us the ballot, and that's a reality in some parts of the country.
Yes.
But we also, there's just a lot of innovation around how can we make early voting available everywhere? How can we make sure that it's really easy to find out who's on your ballot? How can we make it so you don't have to just vote at one polling place on election day, but there are a couple of pilots going on this fall where you can just go vote anywhere. There's 700 locations in Houston in the county where anyone can vote on election day. So I think things like that are really exciting. And then obviously there's a lot of interest in 2020, and my hope is just that carries on to local elections and to everything on the ballot, not just presidential.
Agreed. As you were mentioning all those things too, it gave me sort of excitement for my home state of New Mexico, because we do have early voting. We have absentee voting. Our voting centers are mostly voting convenience centers where it doesn't matter if it's not within your precinct, you can vote anywhere. So New Mexico, we're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, you guys are cutting edge
in the country.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aviva, for your time today. If you're listening to this podcast and you liked what you heard, you want to increase nonpartisan information about our elected officials and access to information that each one of us deserves to have, please visit us at our website at viantenm.org. That's VIANTENM as in New Mexico.org. And we'd love to bring you on board as a member and a supporter of finding nonpartisan solutions through the divisiveness. Thank you, Aviva.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.